15. It didn't take Rodin long to find the list. He ran a search for any file containing the few names he already had: Ratch, the couple and the fat man. Only one file matched all three. He opened it and knew he had the list. There were nicknames he remembered seeing before, as well as genuine names, and by each one a number and further columns of data. Rodin compared this to the list he had obtained from Ratch's screen, the ones connected with Ephraim. All the nicknames on Sporif's list were on Ratch's. The numbers indicated their frequency. The higher the number, the more encounters that person had with the old man's daughter. Sporif had been busy with his own investigations. By each nickname and number was another name, with a further column giving in many cases an address. Somehow, Sporif had figured out exactly who all these people were. Except Ratch himself. That name, and the address Rodin had visited, were all that was given at the very top of the list. No genuine name. Maybe he had gone by the name Ratch for so long that it had stuck. Maybe it was his real name. Rodin ran each name on the list through an in-depth data search, public records as well as those that were not so public. It didn't take long. Apart from Ratch, every person on the list was dead, killed over the last couple of months. In some cases, Rodin read reports of the bodies being mutilated, genitals removed, items forcibly inserted into vaginas and anuses. In one case, a tongue had been ripped out. There were also signs of struggles, with bruising and lacerations along with broken bones. In some cases, others were dead as well. Those who had got in the way. Wrong place, wrong time. Rodin felt angry. This spoke of grabbed opportunities and implied a lack of planning. It should always be possible to reach the target without resorting to more deaths. And the removal of the target should always be achieved with efficiency, and hence the minimal of struggle. Many of these killings were not the work of professionals, but of hired thugs. The line was a thin one, and Rodin knew that he had overstepped it at times, especially when he was starting out. He would be too intent on making sure he made the kill, and would use excessive force. He skipped on planning, and had to deal with the unforeseen appearance of others. But now he didn't make such mistakes. Occasionally, where the target had hired others for their own protection, it was necessary to silence those who presented a barrier. But that was why Rodin liked the lance so much. He could render them unconscious. True, at times it was still necessary to kill others in self-defense. But it was rare. As he read through his information, Rodin felt that itch. He was missing something. He returned his attention to the two lists. He checked that each name on Sporif's appeared on Ratch's. Now he checked in reverse, starting with the list from Ratch's screen. He found the discrepancy. Two names on Ratch's list that did not appear on Sporif's. It might be a mistake on Sporif's part. Maybe he overlooked those names. But Rodin doubted it. The names each appeared more than once. They had been ignored for a reason. He read the names, memorizing them. Handyman with 3 meetings and Blood with 15. Handyman had met with Ephraim only nearer the end of her time with Ratch. Blood had been a regular feature. The names should mean something. But nothing came to Rodin. He would let the names sit in his mind for a while. There were still more questions to look into. For starters, Rodin still didn't know exactly what had happened to the old man's daughter. It was time for a more direct approach. Rodin remembered the old man's address. He went to the building and used the door screen.
Yes.
The voice was still strong, but Rodin heard the crack just beneath the surface. He needed to play this gently, or he'd get nothing. I need to talk.
My son deals with everything now.
I understand. Rodin paused. The screen system was probably not too secure. He didn't want to say too much. But I am searching for the last person, and could do with some information.
My son knows all that I do.
Rodin smiled into the screen. I seriously doubt that. And I doubt he has the wisdom to know when to talk and what to say. He waited a moment, before uttering the phrase he had heard once before. The child is but a shadow of the man. The flattery worked. The door clicked and Rodin pushed it open, making his way up the stairs. The old man was waiting by an open door.
Come in.
Rodin followed him into the small room. It was clean, but beneath the aroma of pine was something that spoke of old age. Rodin couldn't exactly pin it down, but it had a hint of sweat and urine. It spoke of a room where a person spent most of their waking hours. Possibly many of their sleeping ones as well. Stuffy. Too much life in too small a space. The old man had made an effort. His clothes looked clean, although the shirt was wearing thin at the elbows and across the shoulders. At one time the old man must have been formidable. From the history Rodin had been able to dig into, he knew there was strength of character, and that must have been matched by physical strength. But now the muscle tone had gone and the frame was shrinking. There was still life behind his eyes, but that too was fading.
Please sit.
He waved an arm indicating one of two chairs. The old man eased himself into one with a higher back, and Rodin noticed that he did so with little effort, none of the grunting he would have expected. The old man was not as frail as Malice would have Rodin believe. Rodin settled himself into the other chair, one that was a fraction lower to the ground with more cushioning. Where the old man sat upright, Rodin had to keep his weight forward to avoid slouching back.
My son gives me updates. He tells me you have fulfilled 2 contracts so far and you're now on the final one. He tells me that he believes you to be the best.
He smiled.
Of course, I already knew that. He is merely repeating my own words back at me.
Rodin nodded in thanks as the old man continued.
I did some research, as you no doubt realize. I wanted this all done properly. Of course, my son had his own ideas, and some of those he hired would not be on my personal list. But they did the job, I suppose. And Malice would argue that they provided good value for money.
He laughed.
As if that is of any concern to me now.
Rodin thought about Malice taking a cut from the rewards. The old man seemed to have his wits about him. It was likely he already knew, or had his suspicions. Rodin got the impression he was not too concerned with money. Or his son.
So you have your contract. You have your target. You can, I am sure, track him down. Why the visit?
I can find him, yes. But to do so, I need to put myself in his position. I need to see things as he sees them. Then I can understand the path he has taken. The old man sat back, arms resting on the chair's rests, hands curled round the ends. He was giving nothing away, keeping his gaze fixed on Rodin. Rodin took a breath, knowing the old man would see it. All part of the act. I know your daughter was working for this man. This is all connected with her. He knows it too. He has got wind of what is happening, and that is why he has flown. Rodin looked away for a moment, before leaning forward. If I knew what happened, if I knew what he knows about your daughter, I stand a far better chance of understanding him. And then I can track him more efficiently. The old man kept his face straight, but it was a struggle. Rodin noticed the shake in his right arm, and saw him set his jaw, pressing down on his teeth. Then his head rolled back, his eyes shutting gently, and the shaking stopped. One breath, then another. A rattle as he breathed out. He brought his head back down, eyes now open. Rodin held them, finding it took a strange amount of effort. He mirrored the old man's effort.
Do you have children?
Rodin shook his head. Of course not. That meant commitment. That meant being tied down. If he had children, they could be used against him. In his line of work, anyone close would be in danger. He couldn't allow that.
Then I doubt if you can truly understand what I am going through. I have not always been a good father, and I am not proud of some of my actions as a younger man. But I have always looked out for my children. I have always wanted what is best for them. My son is headstrong. I don't need to tell you that. But there is a lot of my younger self in him. He is too confident, and will not listen to the advice of his elders. He is going to make some big mistakes, and there is nothing I can do to prevent that. Nor would I want to. He needs to stand on his own 2 feet. And hopefully, as with myself, he will learn from his mistakes. Hopefully, over time, he will once more be a son who truly makes me proud. But daughters are different. I know they shouldn't be, and I know they are just as tough as sons. In many ways, tougher. But there is still something about having a girl that changes a man. My son can do what he wants. He can screw up, and although I will not like that, it is his decision. He needs to make his own way. But my daughter.
He took another deep breath. Rodin knew this must be hard for the old man. There was not going to be a happy ending.
I looked on my Effie as pure. She was always smiling, with those cheeks pushing out. Always so happy. Whenever I was down, all she had to do was walk into the room, and I immediately felt better. Do you know, she would always have a hug for her father. Always my little girl. I would do anything for her. But then she started getting involved in all this paid companion business.
The old man's eyes were watering, and he brought his hands up, rubbing them into his eyes. They were red when he lowered his hands.
She was an adult. I get that. It was her choice. And she tried explaining it all to me. She said that talking was more important in her job than anything else. She told me of the times a client had cried their heart out to her, and she had comforted them. She had made them feel better. That was how she saw her job, making people feel better. They'd come to her with their problems, and for a moment she'd make them happy. They'd leave with a spring in their step. She'd help them face the world anew. And she almost got me with that. See, I could remember so many times, so many little incidents. She cared so much, my Effie. She'd help others. We had a neighbor, always shouting and cursing, but when he fell on the stairs, it was Effie who helped him. Even while he was shouting at her, she was making sure he was comfortable. So I can understand how she wanted to help others. But I was not naive. I knew the other side of her job. I am sure you know a little of my past. I have lived my life. And I know what else paid companions get up to. What they do to earn their money. And that tore me up inside. Can you imagine someone so close to you, someone who is your own flesh and blood, being treated like that by total strangers? I had seen my daughter naked as a baby, pure and innocent, a thing of beauty, but they were lusting after her flesh, wanting to put their grubby paws all over her. They were wanting to use her. And she would let them. She would take their money, and let them do what they wanted with her body.
The old man was leaning forward, his hands making fists. Rodin looked down. He could understand the anger, but he could also understand the girl. It was a job. No job was perfect. There would always be parts that were not pleasant. But in order to get paid, they had to be endured. Rodin imagined how she might cope. She'd raise a partition. She would detach herself, letting her body do the job while her mind, her true self, was free. Just as a cook would put up with the burns and scalds in the kitchen, just as a mercenary would put up with the wounds and the pain of training, so she would put up with the invasion of her body. Because, at the end of the day, it was only flesh. It was not her true self. Whatever happened, that would still be alive deep inside. The old man resumed, but quieter now. The anger had gone, no, had been pushed back. It was still there, but he was keeping it in check. Rodin was careful to remain passive.
She started complaining of pain in her stomach and lower down. I paid for the best Meditex I could afford, and they told her that there was something wrong inside. I cannot remember the details. Possibly, I didn't want to remember them. All I knew was that my little girl was ill. And she needed treatment. Of course I paid for it all. She tried overruling me, but I had let her down so often, and I needed to make amends. I needed to see my little girl all better again. So I paid for the best. And I insisted she do everything they asked of her.
A smile rose on his face, a brief burst of happiness.
And for a while things looked good. They sorted out whatever was wrong inside, and she recovered. The pain stopped and the color came back to her cheeks. She smiled once again, and I felt like I could cry and leap about all at the same time. It was one of the happiest times of my life. The Meditex explained her condition, but I've never been very good at understanding this kind of stuff. Some kind of deep-seated virus, and although they believed it was under control, there was always the chance that it would flare up again. They told her what kind of activities might cause this. And, of course, with the problem being connected with certain parts of her body, some of the activities included those she allowed others to do to her.
He fell back in his chair, his head back, closed eyes towards the ceiling. Rodin could see where this was going, and part of him wanted to get up and leave. He had the information he needed. He knew why the old man had a vendetta against his daughter's clients and controller. But he needed to let the old man finish. Not for his own sake, but for Effie's father. The old man had probably never told the full story. Rodin would hear him out. Was this what the girl would do? Would her clients unburden themselves like this? And all she could do was listen. No, she could provide physical comfort as well. Rodin imagined her placing an arm across a sobbing man's shoulder. He imagined her talking to the fat man, telling him that it would be okay. Rolls of naked flesh, but she would be stroking his lank hair, soothing his fears.
She was strong, my Effie. Headstrong. Like her old man. She thought she knew best. And she didn't like letting people down. That bastard who gave her to others, she looked up to him. Can you believe that? She tried telling me once that he was a good man, but how can such a man be good? He used her just as much as the clients did. No. He was worse. They would pay for what they did to her. He would give her to them, then take his cut of the pay. He would use her to line his own pocket. That was all she was to him, a way to make a profit. And he convinced her to go back to work. He convinced her to take on her old clients. All those pathetic people who had to buy affection. All those who saw her as some kind of toy. And they fucked her up. They used her and abused her, and the pain came back. They carried on, and all the while she was in agony. He wouldn't let her stop. He forced her to carry on. She was making him money, and that was all he cared about. What did he care if she was dying? What did he care if the work was killing her? He didn't care about anything but himself. And nor did all those others. They all saw her as something to buy, pay and use. They are all guilty, every single one of them. And now it's their turn to suffer. And I want every last one of the bastards to know exactly what they did before they die.
Tears ran down the creases in his face. His voice had been calm and quiet, but Rodin felt the anger. Rodin understood. He stood, moving to one side. If he were a paid companion, he would go to the old man, probably stroking one arm, telling him everything would be okay. But Rodin couldn't do that. He couldn't lie. The man had lost his daughter. Nothing would be okay. "Thank you," he said. "I'm sorry to bring it all up." The old man's quivering head shook. "I'm ready to go after the controller." And he left. There was nothing else he could do.